Good evening. Welcome back. In a recent conversation I had with somebody, they were asking, why do I keep the commandments, the mitzvahs of the Torah? Why do you do that and make that into your lifestyle? How do you know that it's the right thing to do? There are many different lifestyles out there, different roads of spirituality. How do you know that yours is so good? Why are you insistent on doing that? And my response was that I believe that this is God's will, that this is what God has spelled out as this is what He wants me to do. And if God wants me to do it, I've got to do my best to do that. And the response this person gave to me to that was, how on earth could you possibly know what God's will is? How could any person, any human being, claim to know what God wants? How is that humanly possible? You're God, He spoke to you. How do you know what God wants? Everyone thinks they're doing what God's will is, but why do you think that your way is God's will? How could a human being possibly know such a thing? So in thinking about the response to that, I thought there's an assumption beneath that statement. How could a person know what God's will is? There's something behind that, and it's a very strong argument that many would echo. How can people know what God's will is? But it's coming from, I believe, the wrong perspective. Because when I started thinking about it, I thought the opposite. How is it possible that we don't know what God's will is? If God created a universe, and if there is a purpose in that universe, then He has to tell us what that purpose is, because we cannot possibly know what it is. And if God is what God is supposed to be, and that is all-powerful, so then surely He can work out a way to communicate what He wants from us in a way that we will know that that's what He wants from us. If God can't even get His message across, if He can't even communicate to us what He wants from this universe, what we're here for, if He can't even get that across, what type of God is that? What type of omnipotent being, all-powerful being is it that can't even get a message across? It must be the God who created this universe, who created it with a purpose, can communicate what that purpose is. The fact that people get it wrong, or the fact that people make up their own purpose, okay, that's human foibles. But that God can't communicate somehow, He must have somehow got across His message. It's impossible for it not to be that way. So rather than saying, how could a human being possibly know what God wants from you, what God's will is, I would say the opposite. How is it possible that we don't know? We must know. It must be there. It must be given to us. And that I believe is what God communicated through giving us the Torah and the system of Torah in discovering God's will. In this next chapter, Rabbi Zalman, in the penultimate chapter of Tanya, chapter 52, Rabbi Zalman is going to delve into that communication of the divine purpose in life, what God wants from us, based on the discussion that we've been having up until now. We're going to go inside God's mind to know what God wants, how we can access the source of life. If you recall in the previous chapter, Rabbi Zalman told us that just like the soul fills the body, so too God fills the world. The same relationship that the soul has to the body is the relationship that God has to the world. This is an insight, a way of understanding the divine presence in this world. And so, in discussing the topic of holiness, that there are certain places, certain people, certain situations that are called holy, that God's presence is revealed in, and others that are not called holy. Rabbi Zalman questioned that and said, how could it be that any place, any person, any experience is holy as opposed to another one that is unholy? God surely is everywhere. If God is everywhere, so then He's in everything. He's in every experience, in every place. Every place should be holy. And every place, every person should be holy. And so should every experience. How do we say that there are certain things that are holy and certain things that are not? In answering this, he says that just like the soul fills the body, so too God fills the world. That just like when we look at the soul's way it expresses itself in the body, the soul fills the entire body. Our entire body is alive And that's because the soul is in the body. Not because the soul is in a bit of the body. The soul is a spiritual entity. It's a life force. The body is a physical piece of flesh. But the body's being alive is because the soul has become one with it, has united with it. And so therefore our life is our soul, and that life is throughout our body equally. My toe is just as alive as my eye is. They're not different. They're not one is more alive than the other, not one has more soul than the other. I am alive, and therefore I'm alive throughout my body. My soul fills my entire body equally. At the very same time, my soul is not apparent, is not revealed in my entire body equally. There is one part of my body where the soul is apparent, is revealed, is sensed. And from there, the rest of the body gets its life. And that is the brain. The brain is the seat of the soul, the seat of our life. And from the brain, the rest of the body is directed and controlled. So my foot is alive just as much as my brain is alive. But my foot doesn't know that. My foot is not aware of that. My foot doesn't feel it, doesn't sense it. My brain does. Now, of course, as we discussed, our foot feels stuff. When you stub your toe, your foot feels it. Sort of. Because really what you're feeling, the feeling of it is happening in the brain. The brain is sensing, is interpreting the feeling. It's the foot that you stubbed. It's your toe that you knocked on the footpath. And your toe might be the one that's injured, but the feeling, the experience of it is actually happening in your brain. As we discussed at length last week, that your mind can be distracted and you may not feel pain. If your mind is on one thing, then the feeling is diminished because it's the mind, it's the brain that actually experiences everything that's going on in the body. Not only that, but the brain is the headquarters of the soul. It's where the soul rests, and from there spreads through the entire body. So the life force is in the entire body equally, but it's not revealed in the entire body equally. It rests first and foremost in the brain, and from there it spreads to the rest of the body. And so a functioning brain is the beginning of a functioning body. If you haven't got that, if the brain is not functioning, the body cannot function. Life cannot spread through the entire body without the brain having that power. So in a similar way, just like the soul fills the body, so too God fills the world. God is everywhere. There is no place devoid of him. There's no place that God is not there. However, that doesn't mean that he's revealed everywhere. There are certain places where God is revealed. There are certain experiences where God is revealed. There are certain people that have a divine revelation coming through them. It's not that God is with them more than with somebody else. It's that God is revealed in them more than somebody else. These people, places, and experiences are the brain of the world, where the divine light is revealed and therefore spreads through the entire world. And it's this idea we have to explore further to understand what is that brain of the world, where is it, and why do things work that way? And this we'll explore in chapter 52. Says Rabbi Zalman, now just as in the human soul, the main manifestation of the life force is in the brain, while the rest of the body receives merely a ray of energy which shines from the life force in the brain, which, as we just discussed, here Rabbi Zalman's going over the concept again, that in the human soul, the main manifestation, main revelation, the main presence of the life force is in the brain. The entire body is alive, but the manifestation of it, the revelation of it is in the brain. And it's from the brain, a ray of light, a ray of life force spreads through the entire body. So I'm alive in my entire body, but my brain has a direct life force in it, and that life force spreads through the body. My brain sends the signals. It imparts the life force through the body in order for it to function. So as we discussed last week at length, all the various faculties that we have, the power of sight, the power of hearing, the power to walk, all these powers are not in the body, they're in the soul. They're soul powers, they're soul energies, they're soul abilities. They're expressed in the body. The power of sight in the eye, the power of hearing in the ear, and the power of walking in the feet. But they're soul powers. Our feet can't walk. Our feet are just a piece of flesh. When we have a soul, our soul is able to move and instructs the feet to walk. that instruction goes through the brain. So the brain receives the powers of the soul. It has all the powers of the soul. It then differentiates them and funnels them out to the various parts of the body. So the ability to walk goes into our feet, the ability to talk into our mouth. Like they say that if your nose runs and if your feet smell, you're built upside down. It doesn't work that way. That the ability to walk, the ability to run is in the feet, but it's coming from the brain. As is known that if somebody, God forbid, has a brain injury, so then they may have to learn how to walk again. Even though their feet weren't touched, their feet were fine. But if God forbid somebody's brain is affected, so then the functioning of speech may be affected, or walking may be affected, because it all is centered in the brain, and the brain then spreads it out to the various parts of the body. This is just a diagram of the brain showing the various different faculties, how modern science has actually located the parts of the brain where these faculties are working. And so therefore, if God forbid a specific part of the brain was affected by an injury, so that function will be affected. So if the sense of smell is down here at the bottom front of the brain, so then it's not that the nose is there, it's not that the whiff that you're smelling is there, it's that the control of the ability of smell is in that particular part of the brain. And another part of the brain will, on the other side, will control coordination, the ability to walk, to coordinate walking. It's a different part of the brain. It's not the feet, but the power of the feet to walk is there in that part of the brain. So how it's working is, the brain is the center of all of those faculties, all of the powers, all of the soul energies that are then distributed to the different parts of the body. Now this is an important metaphor. So indeed, figuratively speaking, is the life force animating the universe and the creatures in it contained in his will and wisdom, which are called his mind. That the life force of the universe and the creatures of everything that exists, that life force is also contained in the mind of God, as it were, and from there it funnels out into every single detail of creation. We'll need to understand what that means. What is the mind of God here that we're talking about, and how does that work out? We'll have to understand that. But the principle that we've said is, like the soul fills the body, God fills the world. Just like in the body, you've got 3 levels. You've got the soul energy as it is in the soul. You've got the soul energy as it's expressed in the body. And in between those two, you have the brain that takes the soul energy, receives it from the soul, and distributes it to the body. So there's my ability to walk in my feet. That ability is from my soul. But to get from my soul to my feet, it goes through the brain. The brain is the seat of the soul, it's the receptacle of the soul, and from there it funnels down to my feet. So there's the ability to walk that my soul has, but it's not in a body, so it's not going anywhere physically. There's the ability to walk that are in my feet. How do my feet get that ability to walk? That's through the brain that received it from the soul and passed it down, sent the messages to my feet. Before going on and understanding how this works in the divine, we need to understand, why does it work like that in the human being? Why are we created in such a way that we need the brain to receive the soul's energy and light, to have the capacities of the soul, and to then pass it on to the feet, the nose, and the various parts of the body? Why are we structured in such a way? God, who can do anything, created us, and he could have created us in any way. Why are we created in such a way? What does it mean? What's the significance? What's the logic? What's this structure that we've been given, that specifically from the soul it goes to the brain, and from the brain to the rest of the body? In theory, we could have been created that our entire body receives directly from the soul. My ability to walk, that is my soul's power, goes to my feet. Circumventing the brain. We don't need the brain. The brain we need to think. So my power to think is in the brain, because we need brains to think. But why should I need my brain to walk? Why should I need my brain to smell? Why can't the sense of smell, which is a soul faculty, rest in the nose directly, without the brain being in between? Why do we work that way? Now, obviously, it's a strange question to ask, because we just do. Like, that's how it is. From a scientific perspective, that wouldn't be a sensible question. I mean, this is the reality. This is how we are. That it could be another way, okay? That's a theoretical statement. Could have been another way. Fine, but we're dealing with how we are. But what is the pattern here? What is that system that you have soul, you have body, and you have the brain in between? What is actually going on? What's the content of that idea? So, going back to our metaphor, because the way the soul fills the body is the way God fills the world. So, whatever we come up with as the explanation to why our body functions in this way, why it works in that way, we will learn something about the way God interacts with the world. It'll be important for us to know why it works this way, why our body works through the brain. It receives its life force from the soul. It's important to know this because the way our body works is a model of how God works in the world. So yeah, he could have done it another way. The fact he did it this way is to express something to us, is to teach something to us about the way the divine presence is in the world. And once God has set things up in this way, it has to be this way. One of the ideas in Kabbalistic thought is that God set up a system that everything has to be the way it is. You're right, God could have done it any way he wanted. But once he set up the system has rigid rules. This is the way things have to work, and it's going to work that way throughout all of creation. These rules will work in every single area of life, not just a specific area like biology, but it'll work in everything. That the system that God set up and created is a system that is reflected in all of reality. And so we've got a system here. There's the soul, there's the body, and there's the brain in between. We need to understand why does the system work that way? What is the meaning of this system? So, as things are currently, as our body and our soul is at the moment, what if there would be a shift, a change in this system? What if we would say, no, I refuse to let my brain get in the way. My soul is going to enliven my body directly. My soul will give life force to all parts of my body directly without the brain coming in between. What would happen? What would happen if it shifted? Conflict.
Everything, each part would want to operate on its own sense, without the perhaps control center defining the attention, the direction, the purpose.
So there wouldn't be unity in the bodily functions.
Yes.
And so the brain is giving a sense of unity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if it was directly soul to body, so then my sense of smell would be its own thing, directly from the soul.
Perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a theory. Any others? What does the brain contribute here? According to this system, what is the brain giving? It seems to be just passing on from soul to body.
Processing.
Processing, what do you mean?
It's not really just transmitting the information, it's processing the perception of that smell or the pain because the pain is only information, and the way you react would be a result of the processing of the brain.
So without a brain, if we, let's say, had pain, it would just be a fact. There'd be a fact that I'm in pain. It wouldn't have any experience to it. The fact that the brain is what's experiencing the pain means that there's context to it. We can experience it, analyze it, learn something from it. Yeah? Yep. So certainly without the brain we wouldn't have that.
I think it's also adding a lot of challenges.
The brain adds a lot of challenges.
Adding to that, the complexity to the whole smooth function.
Right. So if we wouldn't have that, life would be simpler.
I tend to think.
Without a brain. Yeah. Definitely the Talmud says, Yosef Da'at, Yosef Machov. The more awareness you have, the more pain you have. If we would be unaware beings, so then we wouldn't feel pain. It would just be another bit of life, but it wouldn't have any meaning. But with awareness comes pain. Which, by the way, the Talmud doesn't say that to discourage awareness. It says it as a reality. Pain is not necessarily bad as well. It's not pleasant always, but if you wouldn't know what you're doing is painful, so then you continue doing it. And the pain is just the signal that what you're doing is not good sometimes, or what's happening to you is not good. Without an awareness, without knowledge, you wouldn't process that information. So, yeah. So, really with our understanding of the way the soul works, if we wouldn't have the brain in between, not only would we have chaos, and not only would we lack awareness and experience, but we wouldn't actually be able to function at all in an orderly way. We wouldn't be able to express our abilities, because soul and body are so far from each other, are so distant, are so disconnected, are so foreign, that there would be no communication between the two. There would be no common ground. The soul's energies and the body's vessels would not fit with each other, because the soul energy is a purely spiritual, undifferentiated entity, and the body is a very limited, finite entity. And so if we just had soul and body without anything in between to intermediate and to deliver, we would actually be stuck. We wouldn't be able to express our powers. As we touched on in the previous chapter, when we talk about the soul's powers, we're not saying that the soul itself has those powers. It doesn't actually contain powers. The soul is not a conglomerate of bits and pieces. The soul is a pure, undifferentiated energy, divine energy, a divine light, a source of life. The fact that the soul delivers powers to the body is that the soul has all these potentials in it, and through the body they become actualized. So the sense of smell, the sense of sight, and the power to walk, it's not that the soul has them, that you can point, like we looked at this brain and said that the power of speech is over here and the power of smelling is over there. We said that about the brain. You can't say that about the soul. You can't make a diagram of the soul and say over here is the power to walk and over here is the power to talk. The soul is an undifferentiated spiritual entity. It's life, it's energy, it's divine light. That's what the soul is. The fact that from the soul come these powers is because the soul in that light has multiple potentials, has many powers to it that can become differentiated and expressed when the soul rests in the body. Like the metaphor we used last week of electricity, that the electricity, that when you plug something into the socket, so you can plug many things into the same socket and different powers will come out. So too, the soul has many different powers not there's a power here and there's a power there. It has many potentials. And when you plug the body into that power source, so then the body comes alive, and the eyes, which are the vessels for sight, can see. And the ears, which have the apparatus for hearing, can hear. The soul power to hear is expressed in the ear. But that soul power is not in the soul. You can't trace it back to the soul and say, here in the soul is the power to hear. And so therefore there must be something that happens in between here. In between the undifferentiated state of the soul and then the differentiated state of the body and its faculties that come from the soul, something had to happen in between. There had to be some stage in between where the powers of the soul were received, were given some type of identity, and were then funneled out to their correct places. Because from undifferentiated singularity to the varying powers of the body, how did one get to the other? And that's the function of the brain. The brain is the intermediary that receives the light of the soul in its undifferentiated form and starts to refract that light into different faculties that are then expressed in the specific parts of the body. You can almost visualize it that the way an intermediary works in any form, an intermediary has to have features of both what it's receiving from and what it's delivering to be in between. I mean, a simple example would be an interpreter. If you've got a person who speaks only Chinese, and you have a group of people, none of whom speak Chinese, but they all speak fluent Romanian. So there's going to be a difficulty here. There are very few words in Chinese and in Romanian that are in common. And so there's not much of a conversation that's going to be able to happen. In fact, even sign language and gestures are different in different cultures. They can mean the opposite things. There's no way of communicating. The only way you're going to be able to get this group to have a communication is if you have an interpreter. The interpreter, quite simply, needs to speak Chinese and Romanian. You can't be an interpreter if you speak one of the languages and not the other. You may have many languages, but if you don't speak both, so then you can't interpret. But somebody who speaks fluent Chinese and fluent Romanian will be able to hear the message from the Chinese speaker and then pass it over to the Romanian audience. So the intermediary has a bit of this and a bit of that, has Chinese and has Romanian. That's always what an intermediary has to be. Here we're saying that the brain is the intermediary between the soul and the body. And to do that job, you need to have a bit of both. You need to have elements that are similar to the soul, elements that are similar to the body. You have to be able to relate to the two of them, and then you can pass the message along. The powers of the soul, as they are in the soul, are undifferentiated. The soul's description is, it's a singular light. It has in it the potential for many faculties. It has the potential for sight, for sound, for walking, but it's not placed in the soul, it's not differentiated. We want to get them differentiated so sight goes to the eyes and smell goes to the nose. The brain does that by receiving all the faculties from the soul and then bringing them to the body. But how? Because the brain has a bit of both. On the one hand, the brain is just one thing, the brain. It's the mind. That's what it is. But on the other hand, it does have parts, like we see in this diagram. There are different parts and sections and abilities within the brain itself. So is the brain singular or plural? Is the brain the singularness like the soul has? Or is it the plurality like the body is? Is it a differentiated reality or an undifferentiated reality? What's the brain? It has a bit of both. On the one hand, it's just the brain. we're just talking about the brain with its faculty of awareness, of intellect. That's what the brain is. Intelligence, which is a bit singular. But that brain itself has many faculties to it, has many abilities to it, which is a bit plural.
Is that why it's flawed? Or why it sends incorrect messages and make mistakes? Because it's differentiated.
Oh, so yeah, because the brain essentially is a part of the body. In the end of the day, what the brain is it's also a piece of flesh, just like our feet are flesh. It is a part of the body. And so therefore it's fallible and imperfect, just like the body is. It's receiving from the soul, but that reception could be clouded as well, because it's body, it's physical. On the other hand, why is it then the brain that receives from the soul, if at the end of the day the brain is just flesh? So why can't the feet be the headquarters? Why is the brain any better than the feet? Why should it be the receptacle? Because even though the brain is physical, the very definition of brain, of mind, is the ability to perceive something outside of us, something beyond. There's no other part of our body that can do that can experience a reality that's completely outside of us, beyond us. Something that, from the bodily perspective, is theoretical. The rest of our body can experience sensual experience, something that we're in contact with. But the brain can experience something that we don't have contact with. It's beyond our reality. It's outside of us. And that is a little bit of an opening to spirituality. That's an openness towards the spiritual reality, to the soul. The only part of us that can experience that is the brain. So on the one hand, the brain is a piece of flesh, it's a part of the body. On the other hand, the brain has the ability to conceptualize, to open us to higher realities, other realities, which makes the brain the perfect interpreter between soul and body. It gets the language of the soul and it speaks the language of the body, because it is body. But what part of the body is it? Intellect, awareness. So this is why brain is so important. This is why the mind is the seat of the soul, because it's got that duality to it. It's got the ability to be the intermediary. Had we not been built in this way, or if for whatever reason that's not working, our brain is not working, so then the soul cannot rest in the body because they don't speak the same language. They can't communicate, they can't interact. The brain gets the soul's message and conveys that to the body.
Can I ask you?
Yeah, sure.
If the mind, or like intelligence, is universal, because you haven't just got your little piece of mind, or like you say, the brain is, it's something. If you cut open the head, they'll be able to find the physical brain. But in that brain, that's not where the mind is. So, and then you're saying that the brain is the intermediary between the body and the soul. So is the mind part of the soul?
Okay, that's a great question. So I guess we have to be more specific in the terms that we use. That we're not suggesting that the physical brain is in any way spiritual. Again, the physical brain, the brain matter is flesh, just like the feet. It's the power that the brain has, the faculty that's specific to the brain, that is what makes it unique compared to the rest of the body, which is the mind. So you're right, you can't cut open the brain and find the mind in there, find awareness in there, but The brain is the seat, is the tool through which mind, intellect works. And so, in Tanya language, he uses the word moichin, which moach in Hebrew means brain, but he uses that not necessarily referring to the organ, the brain, but mind. It can be understood as the mind. Yeah. And so too, when we look at this diagram, the same thing. It's not that the ability of language is there, it's that the tools that allow the mind's ability for language rest there. Just like we say about the nose. That's not the power of smell that the nose has, it's the soul's power that's expressed in the nose. So too, all these soul powers, they're expressed in the brain. But it's the mind, it's that we're really talking about here.
If you're talking about the part of the soul that's connected to God, then wouldn't it be the fact that the soul could make the brain do anything or not do anything that it wanted to? So even though the brain is supposed to have particular functions, if the soul wanted it, your body to not receive particular messages or sensations, it would just block them because it's above the limitations of the physical workings and mechanics of a brain.
So what would be an example of that?
Well, what I'm saying is, couldn't your soul make or your brain do anything or not do anything? I mean, the particular the way that you comprehend a message from your soul, wouldn't your soul have? Your soul would know all of your experiences, all of your memories, and so it would be able to direct your brain to process information in a particular way, if it wanted to.
Yeah.
So if there's a bug in the system, in a translator or converter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's the soul with the purity.
Right.
Going through the brain, there's a bug there
Mm-hmm.
that actually controlling the body not as expected.
Right.
Where do you go?
Okay, that's a great question. So, according to this model, the brain is so vital, and the health of the brain is therefore so vital, because for the soul to be able to land in the body, it's going through the brain. So your soul is pure, is holy, is good, is fine. And therefore, like you said, the soul would not send bad messages or wrong messages. The soul is pure, but it's the brain that may misinterpret or misunderstand or not do its job and not send those messages down. So just in a very physical and biological sense. So if the brain is injured, so then the ability to walk or to talk or to think clearly or whatever may be affected. So in a moral sense as well, our ability to sense the will that our soul has and express that, to do what's good. So the brain is a very important feature in this, because our perceptions of right and wrong, the way we think what is right and what is wrong, that is going to sometimes skew what our soul knows is right and wrong. If our mind doesn't have a clear sense of morality, so then our soul has this drive to do good. That's what our soul has. It wants the body to do good, but it can't get there without going through the brain that decides what I'm going to do today. Where am I going to send my body today? And if my brain has skewed ideas of what's right and wrong, my desire to do good is going to be mistranslated in my brain to doing stuff that's not necessarily good.
Basically, it's training. It's like, you know that from 0 to 6, your unconscious mind is creating all of those beliefs because of your parents, because of ideas, because of where you live and what you're surrounded with. So it's just by training, like you train a muscle to work again.
Right. Correct.
So we need
Correct.
training.
Correct. Perhaps here we see why Rabbi Shneur Zalman, who wrote the Tanya, he called his philosophy Chabad. Chabad stands for Chachma Bina Dat, which are the three intellectual faculties, the faculties of the intellect. Why did he call his philosophy Chabad? So people mistakenly think because he's very intellectual. He's very cerebral, and he has a lot of philosophical ideas that appeal to the mind. No, that's not why he's called it Chabad. It's all about the soul. All of his philosophy is about trying to channel the soul down and live a soulful life. But the key to the soul is Chabad, is the intellectual faculties. If you haven't got it clear in your mind, so then your body's not going to receive what your soul is trying to give it. And so that's why study is important, learning, understanding, really getting these concepts, because it clarifies the pathway of the soul to be expressed in the body, because it has to go through the mind. And so that's all it's our education and our experiences and our surroundings and our influences. All of that contributes to our mindset. And what's amazing about our mind is that it is so malleable. It is changeable. Of all the parts of ourselves, it is the one part that can be changed, not easily, but readily. It's possible to change it. You can't change your personality very quickly. Your physical body can't change very quickly. Your soul can't change all that much, but your mind can be changed. We can have a conversation. The ideas can seep into our minds. We can discuss things, and something we never thought can suddenly become a part of my mentality and the way I think. I can read a book, I can study something, and ideas can expand my entire horizon. I couldn't change my body so quickly, and I can't change my soul, and certainly my character traits are not going to change overnight, but my mindset can be opened up in an instant. And so that's why he called it Chabad. That's why it's about intellect, because intellect is the key to our moral life, and also it's all I can talk to.
Where do other energy centers, as would be considered in other traditions, chakra systems, other ways that we basically can open and clear pathways for us in our maybe ethereal body beyond this limited kind of form, where do they fit in within this kind of conduit, which is sort of beyond brain?
It's an interesting question. I don't know. That would need to be examined further. It's an interesting question.
But as an idea, it's just the maintenance of the body. It doesn't matter if it's your energy field, because if you zoom in, we basically only light and information. So if that's, people call that maintenance of the chakras, which is energy centers. The name is not that. It's just, I think, the maintenance of energy field, maybe.
I don't know. That would be a topic of itself. It definitely deserves exploration. For another time, we'll save that one. Okay. So now we have a much more profound appreciation for the metaphor. And remember, this is all metaphor so far. Not that it's not real. We're using the interaction of the soul and the body via the brain as a metaphor, as an illustration of how God interacts with the world. And we said that just as the human soul is expressed in the body through the brain receives the powers of the soul and then spreads them, is the intermediary that spreads this through, so too we said the life force animating the universe and the creatures in it contained in his will and wisdom, which are called his mind. That there is something which we haven't yet really defined called the divine mind, his will and his wisdom, just like a person, our will and our wisdom. Our will is our drive to exist, to achieve, to do whatever. That's coming from our mind power. And our awareness, our wisdom, our thought process, our perspective. This is our mind. So too there's a divine will and wisdom, which is the mind of the world, through which the divine light, God himself, reaches creation. Because we say the same thing, just like the soul cannot enliven the body directly, because the soul's powers are undifferentiated singularity, oneness, and the body is multiplicity, has various faculties. There needs to be this intermediary that can translate the two. In a similar way, for the divine reality, for the divine energy, for the divine light, which is singular, pure oneness, for that to interact with the world, which is multiplicity and division and physicality, there needs to be an intermediary translating it. And that's the divine mind. What is this? Only a glow is diffused and shines forth from this source in a similar manner as the light radiates from the sun, or as the powers of the organs of the body derive from the brain, as discussed above. That the divine light in the world cannot be direct. God's light cannot shine directly into the world. It is only a glow, a ray, an extension of the light that can be received by the world. The world will not be able to handle a direct divine light. For our world to exist in its current form, as it is, which is the way God wants it, a physical world that has a sense of autonomy, that I exist and I feel that I exist. For us to have that sense, we cannot receive direct divine light. If God would shine his energy on us directly, we would be subsumed by that energy, we would be lost in it, we would not feel our own existence. Only a ray, a reflection, a diluted version of that light can reach us. Not a direct light, because we'd be overwhelmed by it. Like the light radiating from the sun, if we had the sun here with us, it wouldn't be very pleasant. It's hot today, but that heat is just the light of the sun, the rays of the sun reaching us. If we'd have the sun itself down here, so then we'd be wishing we had the weather that we had today. We can't survive with the direct sun in us. The sunlight is all we can handle, and even that is pretty warm. In a similar way, the divine light, if the divine light was directly enlivening us, if we would have God's light shining directly on us, we would be overwhelmed by it. Only a ray of that light can reach us, to give us our existence, to enliven us. Again, the same metaphor, the soul enlivens the body, God is the soul of the universe, enlivens the universe, but can't be direct, because if it would be direct, it would be overwhelming. If the light of the soul went directly into the body, we wouldn't be able to function. It needs to be mediated by the brain. So, we need to set up now the system like we have in our body, where you've got the soul's undifferentiated light, which is refracted through the brain, received and then communicated to the body in its particular bits and pieces, and the body can handle receiving from the brain. The body wouldn't be able to handle receiving from the soul, because the soul is pure spirituality, the body is physicality. We need the brain in between, which is a bit of both, which can handle the spiritual and then translate it into physical. The world needs the same thing. The world needs an intermediary to receive the divine energy and then translate it into physicality. As the worlds cannot endure or receive the light of this Shekhinah, the divine presence, that it might actually dwell and clothe itself in them, without a garment to screen and conceal its light from them, so that they may not become entirely nullified and lose their identity within their source, like the nullification of the light of the sun in its source, the sun itself, where this light cannot be seen, but only the mass of the sun itself. Just like we down here receive the light of the sun, but not the sun itself, so too the world can only receive the light of God, but not God himself. If God himself would shine directly into the world would be lost, completely overwhelmed. So there needs to be some type of garment, an enclothement, a curtain, some type of filter that can allow the divine light to enliven this world, to be the soul of the world, but not overwhelm it. To be present in the world, but not blasted away, blown away by it. You know, people often ask, why can't we see God? Why wouldn't it be possible to see God? So in the Talmud, one of the sages said to somebody who asked this question, I want to see God, why can't I see him? So this Talmudic sage said, look at the sun. And he said, you can't look at the sun. He said, just look at it just for a little bit. Just stare at the sun for just a little bit. He said, no, you can't. You can't look at the sun. So the sage said, well, the sun is just one of God's creations. If the light of the sun is so intense you can't look at it, so then how much more is God so intense that you can't look at him? Meaning, the brilliance of this answer and this explanation is, it's not that God is invisible, so you can't see him. It's not that you can't see him because he's not able to be seen. He could be seen in theory. God could let himself be seen. But that wouldn't be good for us. We wouldn't be able to handle such a thing, because seeing him would be being him. If you saw God, you would end up him. You wouldn't be yourself anymore. You would be swallowed up by the experience. As intense as the experience of staring at the sun is for your eyes, that it consumes your eyes, looking at God would consume your entire being. Because if you perceive him, if you get him directly, if you really get God, so then you're lost in him. You're no longer you. This is illustrated in one of the phrases of the early Jewish philosophers. They said that if I would know God, I would be God. If I would know God, I would be God. Which means that if you would really be able to understand God, if you could really get him, if you could really perceive him in a direct way, if God would make sense to you, then you could no longer be defined as a human being. Because a human being is a finite being. God is infinite. And if you are perceiving infinity, you're gone. You're not there anymore. You're a part of that infinity. You lose yourself in it, which might be a wonderful thing. It might be fantastic to lose yourself in God. It's not necessarily bad, but that's not what God wants. He created you to exist. To exist means you have to be a distance from him. You can't perceive him, you can't see him, you can't understand him, because if you would, you'd be him. If you would know him, you would be him. So he has to create this distance. But the distance can't be an absolute distance, because God, after all, is creating us, is enlivening us, and wants us to relate to him. So he's got to keep a certain distance, but not so much that he can't be perceived at all, that we can't connect to him at all. Because then you also wouldn't have God's purpose. You'd have a world that is separate from him. So we've got a bit of a quandary here. We've got a little riddle that we have to sort out. That God wants the world to exist. He wants us to have an identity. He wants you and me to be real people with free choice, with a life, with a sense of self, finite beings. But he wants to relate to us as well. He wants to have a relationship with us. And to do that means he's got to give us enough space to exist and enough closeness to connect with him. Again, like the soul and the body. The soul enlivens the body, but the soul can't directly connect with the body because it would be too overwhelming. The soul is pure energy. The body is physical limitation. So there needs to be some middle ground here, some intermediate stage where the divine light is filtered enough to be palatable to us, digestible to us, but at the same time, not so much that we don't sense it, that we connect to it. There needs to be something in between. We need a garment. In the human being, the garment is the brain, is the mind. And we said that here as well, God has a mind that is the intermediate as well. So the question is, what is that garment? What is this garment which is able to conceal and clothe the Shekhinah and yet will not itself be completely nullified within its light? Because we've got a problem here. Whatever the intermediary is, the intermediary also can't be swallowed up in the light of God. going back to the metaphor of the interpreter, if I speak Chinese and Romanian, so then I can listen to the Chinese message and I can translate it into Romanian. That's fine. But here we're talking about translating God's infinite light to be palatable for the finite world. We said the problem is that if the infinite light reaches the finite world, it won't be finite anymore. It'll be subsumed. If I know him, I'll be him. The world will be swallowed up. So we need an intermediary. Where are you going to go to get this intermediary? To find someone who speaks Chinese and Romanian, there's probably not so many in the world, but there'll be someone. But to find, where are you going to go to find something that can handle the infinite light of God and then translate it into finite language? Aren't they human beings?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Where do they get this ability from? How could a Kabbalist have this ability? They're part of the finite world. We need something that's not a part of the finite world, but can relate to the finite world. So what is this garment that itself can conceal and clothe the Shekhinah, the divine presence, filter it enough to be handled, but itself not get subsumed? It can handle God. This is the divine will and wisdom which are clothed in the Torah and its commandments that are given to us and to our children. This is what Torah is. And this is an unbelievable definition, a mind-blowing definition of what Torah is. Torah is the mind of God, his wisdom and his will, that is on the one hand completely divine, it's totally his, and on the other hand it's totally ours. It's given to us and talks about our life, about the way we live our life. It's the perfect intermediary between the infinity of God and the finite universe, because it's a bit of both. It's his wisdom, it's his thing. This is what he produced, this is what he wrote, these are his thoughts, this is his opinion, this is what he would like, this is what he's asking us. It's God's wisdom and will, and it's given to us, and it's talking about the way we should celebrate our festivals, and the way we should run our homes, and the way we should interact in our relationships, and the way we should conduct our business. So it really is both. It's infinity talking about finiteness. It's God's view on our life. And so it is the intermediary, it is the mind of God. This is a very new and powerful way of viewing the Torah and its commandments. This is the way to sneak infinity into the finite world. It's the filter that can receive divine and translate it into here and now, into this world, because it's both. It's God's will about this world. Some people find it surprising when they study Torah how mundane it is. If you read the 5 books of Moses, so it's a story about a family of seemingly quite real, familiar type of people. And they're developing into a nation and going through ups and downs of history and traveling to their eventual homeland and going through all types of things where they complain and they have issues and they have difficulties and they have conflicts. And the advice they're given by God is about how to live in the here and now. It's very unexpected. Divine revelation, in a cliched sense, on top of a mountain, what's God going to tell you? Some like high principles of some other reality. And yet, Torah is a revelation of how to eat and how to live and how to interact in this world, in the here and now. And the people that receive the Torah and the characters that the Torah tells us about are quite normal people. that do normal stuff, like get married and have a family and have issues with their kids, or create a community where there's difficulties and challenges to keep it together. It's like, it's normal stuff. I'm not suggesting that all the people in the Torah are just like you and me. God didn't speak to me, and my life is not going to be recorded for people to read in 5,000 years from now. But I can relate to these people. I can read their story and I can emulate them. I can try and go in their path. Because Torah is the divine wisdom about our life, about the here and now. It's the perfect intermediary between the infinity of God and the finiteness and the smallness of our world. And so what that means is that when we perform a mitzvah, when we do one of the commandments of the Torah, what are we actually doing at that moment? We are aligning ourselves with the divine mind. We are doing what the divine will says. This is what God has asked us to do. So we are becoming that conduit. We are giving legs to the mind of God. We're expressing the divine infinite light and bringing it down into the world. A mitzvah is suddenly not just a good deed. It's not just a commandment. It is the drawing down of the infinity of God into the finite world. And so every time we do a mitzvah, we're expressing God's infinity down here in the finite world. Which is why, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman says many times in Tanya, the mitzvahs that we do, they all involve physical acts, our body, and often physical objects. So putting up a mezuzah is taking a physical animal hide written with ink and putting it on the door of the home that you walk by on a daily basis to do your normal everyday stuff. And that is holy. You've taken infinity and brought it into finiteness. And making a blessing over food, or lighting a candle, or wrapping tefillin, or shaking a lulav, or blowing the shofar, or giving charity, all these things is my body, my physical self, taking a physical object and doing something that I'm only doing it because this is a divine command. So I'm taking infinity and bringing it into finiteness. I'm the conduit. I'm becoming a part of that intermediary, that conduit, taking infinity into this world. And that it will create what God originally intended out of this world. That the finite world should become a home for His infinite presence. Just like we said before about the brain being the intermediary between the soul and the body, there are many talents that our soul contains that we haven't expressed in our body. They say, it's commonly said that we only use 10% of our brain and we don't use the other 80%. That's a joke. It's at least that. There are many faculties that our soul has that our body has not yet tapped into. Not just intelligence, not just brain power in this form of intelligence, but all types of skills that we have. So, how do you get from the soul to the body? It's all through the brain. That if our brain is trained and is opened and is expanded, we'll find that things that we didn't think we could do, we could start to do. Our body can do things. Whether it be the most mundane activity or the most sublime activity. But there are skills and talents that we have, whether it be artistic or musical, or whether it be intellectual areas that we have more powers than we thought. The brain is the intermediary that allows it to come down. And so your brain has to, first of all, believe that you can do it, have the confidence that you can do it, and then train practice and focus and create the pathway so the power of the soul can be expressed in the body. And so the more expansive your brain's horizons become, the more opportunities the body has to express the soul. In a similar way, if the divine will and wisdom, the divine mind, is expressed through Torah, so by studying that wisdom, the wisdom of Torah, and by doing the commandments, what we're doing is we're expanding the world's capacity to handle godliness. We're making the world more open to holiness. It can handle more now. We said before that God can't shine his light directly on the world. The world can't handle such a thing. Infinity can't shine into the finite world. It'll be overwhelming. Only a ray of the divine light can shine into the world. That's true, but how powerful that ray is adjusted as we expand the ability of the world to handle it, as we refine the world through our acts of goodness, through a mitzvah, so the world can handle a bit more holiness now. The world has become a broader receptacle. And so more abilities can be expressed in the world, more holiness can be expressed in the world. The world actually can become better. This is the invisible revolution that is going on all around us that we're not even aware of. We sometimes look at the world and say, what a terrible, dark, horrible place. Things seem to be getting worse. And terrible things happening all around the world. And it's true. What we're not seeing is that at the same time, there are more and more mitzvahs being done, more and more good deeds being done in an accumulative fashion from the beginning of the project that God created. And that is allowing the world to handle more holiness. And that is tipping the balance towards goodness. The world is getting better. We just don't see that so much because it's not always so visible. But sometimes we do see a little bit. But every deed we do, every mitzvah we do, is expanding that ability, is broadening the divine mind that can allow more light into the physical world. So we now, as we're getting to the end of Tanya, we're now getting a feel of where Rabbi Shneur Zalman has been going all the way through this book. That one of the great emphases that he's had throughout the book is the emphasis on the deed, on doing. That doing a good deed is far more important than meditating on it. The act is what counts the most, because the act of doing good is what actually transforms the world and broadens the vessels of the world to handle more holiness, to more goodness. And this will bring to the ultimate purpose of the world, which is that God should be revealed in the world in his full glory. The infinity of God should be revealed in what was a finite world but has been expanded to handle infinity. May we merit to see that very soon. So, to summarize, infinity sneaks into the finite world. The soul needs an intermediary to interact with the body, which is the brain. For the soul, which is spirituality, which is a spiritual entity, to interact with the body, which is physical, the oneness of the soul to be expressed in the multiplicity of the body, there needs to be the brain, which has a bit of both. It is, on the one hand, physical. The brain is a part of the body. It's divisible. It's got different parts to it. But on the other hand, it's one thing. It's the brain. And it is open to that which is beyond it, spirituality. So the brain can be the seat of the soul, and it can then translate the powers to the various parts of the body. In a similar way, the divine will needs to filter through which it can energize the finite world, the Torah. And so it means that the mitzvah that we do is not just making the world a better place, it is energizing the world. It is bringing the divine light into the world. The world cannot survive without it, without the good deeds that we do. Just like the body cannot survive without the soul energizing it, and therefore it needs the brain to function in order for the soul energy to be spread through the body. And if that brain, God forbid, would stop functioning, that would be the end of the connection between soul and body. In a similar way, the world needs the good deeds that we do for its very survival, because the world cannot survive without divine light. It is dependent on God's energy for its existence. It has no independent source of existence. And so therefore a mitzvah is now not just a good deed. It's not just making the world better. It's not just expanding the world's ability to handle godliness. It is actually vital for the world's existence. And so therefore the next move we do better be a mitzvah, because the world needs it. Okay. Any questions? No? Okay. Yeah.
To the dentist and they give you an injection.
Yeah.
You don't feel the pain. No. So what happens then?
What is happening?
I mean, the soul stops sending the message that it's pain.
So, I don't know the workings of anesthesia, like how it works. I mean, that's you need to ask a doctor how it works. But it's an example of that physically the same thing is happening to you. Like the dentist is like drilling away, and so what it's the nerves which are what send the messages to the brain are deadened. So again, that illustrates the same idea. Physically the same thing's happening to you, but the message has been cut off to the brain, so you don't feel it. So it's the same idea. Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be able to explain it properly, but it seems like there are some people that can hold more light. Imagine Rabbi Schneerson that wrote that book. There are people around us that can, as if they're not in between. They are human. They are all these worlds
Yes.
that are not.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like there's more than the Torah to hold there, to translate the light.
So definitely, when we say Torah, the Torah needs people to bring it alive. The Torah as a book on the shelf or as a scroll in the ark, that's not doing what needs to be done. It's people who embody it and who live it. And there's two ways of doing that. There's doing the commandments, which anyone can do, and then there's teaching the Torah, which is something that certain individual souls in every generation have the power to actually contribute to the process of revealing Torah. And so somebody like the author of Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, so he was a soul, a conduit soul who was bringing down these ideas, which existed before him, but the way he brought it down and the way he expanded the ideas is totally new in a way. And so it's new Torah. He's bringing down new Torah. So just like there was a Moses, without Moses we wouldn't have the Torah either. It's God's Torah, but God has to communicate it through a person for the same reason, because God doesn't. God cannot communicate to the masses unless there's a person who's on the level that can hear the message and then convey it. And
the question was, what then is the difference with that soul? What makes
them that soul and others not?
Right.
So there are some souls that are born with that ability, and there are some souls that worked on it to get there. You know, just like mentioned before, not all of us can become violinists, or we don't have all the powers of everything in our soul. Each one of us has a soul that has particular powers, and so some of us maybe have the power but are not utilizing it yet, and so with work we could develop that power. And there are some things that we can't either, and so each of us, that's not our mission, that's not our job. So some souls were just born with it naturally, and other souls worked to reveal this power within them, but not everyone can do that. But each one of us can contribute our bit to the big picture. Okay. So, and God willing, next week we will be doing chapter 53, the final chapter of Tanya.